Grant Masterson is an expert on elections. He joins us now. Grant, good afternoon to you. So we have the Electoral Commission taking us through the preparations, quite detailed preparations. There's a lot that's different with this election. There's independent candidates for the first time. That means that we have a three-page ballot paper, three ballot papers, I should say. From what we can see, is the Electoral Commission actually ready for this? Are they where they should be in what's probably going to be our biggest elections?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Yeah, this is definitely a different election. I think that whenever there are changes, particularly when you go and add a different ballot paper and there are different instructions, we've been quite spoiled in South Africa. Since 1994, we've had a relatively similar electoral system throughout until now, with some very minor adjustments under the hood, which voters wouldn't really notice. But voters are definitely going to notice the changes this time. As you've said, we go from 2 voting papers to 3. We're adding independent candidates. The way in which we calculate things will also become apparently clearer to voters. It's also going to get more complicated in the post-election period. So there's definitely changes here. And we need to remind ourselves that the IEC has had to do all of this on a very short preparation period because they have lacked legal certainty around the electoral system due to various parliamentary processes that were delayed, which you and I have discussed previously. I'm, of course, talking about the Electoral Amendment Act, which came in a lot later than the IEC would have preferred. That being said, the IEC are working around the clock, as they always do at this time. From what I can see and from what other people who are watching them closely can see, they appear to be on track to deliver the elections on time. And we certainly hope that for their sake that they can do that.
There are more parties, more candidates, more paperwork, more computer work too. I suppose just the sheer volume of work. Is it fair to say that from that point of view, this is the sort of biggest election we've ever done? I realize 1994 was very different circumstances. But in terms of the sheer volume of stuff that has to be done, would these be our biggest elections yet?
From a technical perspective, the changes are really the big thing, Stephen. The rest of it, the IEC has got a well-established team. That team has delivered elections in the past that we have been very happy with as South Africans, and we should be very happy with those elections. The changes are really where things get tricky because sometimes it's the smallest changes that can really rock the boat quite significantly. One example of that would be something that had nothing even to do with the Electoral Commission. It was the change of the ID document to the ID card done by Home Affairs. That actually ended up having quite an interesting impact on the elections last time we held national elections in this country. So sometimes it's not even things that we're looking at relating to the Electoral Commission and their work that can impact the elections and make things challenging. But as far as a technical process is concerned, it's the additions rather than, I guess, the political significance or the number of parties, really. You know, if you have 40 parties, if you have 90 parties, the calculations are the same, and the IC knows how to do those calculations. So it's not necessarily the case that just because you have more and more and more, the elections get bigger from a technical perspective. At a political level, that's a very different conversation, though.
No, sure. And I mean, let's talk about that then, because the whole thing is sort of being overshadowed in a way, I think because it's sort of fun in a strange political way, around former President Jacob Zuma and controversies and the decision by the Electoral Commission, they say, to seek clarity from the Constitutional Court on their role in deciding whether or not Zuma does qualify to be a candidate for MK to actually go to Parliament. And there's a lot to this case. I'm sure you've seen lots of different views about it. MK, of course, are furious at the IEC's decision. Do you think the IEC had a choice here? Should they have stepped back from appealing, or were there sort of legal reasons they really needed to get clarity on this?
The IEC should always seek clarity from the courts when there are legal issues at stake, and it's important that they do so, whether it is, in this case, former President Jacob Zuma, or whether it is an independent candidate who no one has ever heard of before. The IEC is in a position where it is required to ensure that it follows the law as it understands it. And so the Commission, which guide the IEC, applied their minds, they've looked at the matter, and they've said, we need to understand why it is that the Electoral Court has made the decision that they do. There's nothing in their request for clarity here and in their legal process of appeal that is in any way sort of persecuting any individual, although Mr. Zuma may argue it's certainly targeted against him. He does like that narrative. That narrative does suit him. But the IEC, from its perspective, is almost required when it is trying to understand a complex legal matter, then it turns to the courts, and it has done in the past. Let's remember in the local government elections, they turned to the courts to get clarity on whether or not they could postpone the elections beyond the legal limit that the Constitution imposed on them. And so they turned to the courts to get clarity on that. And the court said, no, you cannot. So they worked within the legal limits imposed on them by the law. And that's certainly what's happened here. So yeah, there's lots going on around that particular case. But from the IEC's point of view, I don't believe that there is anything else that they could have done. They do need to seek legal clarity there.
So we have a situation where MK is saying that the IEC is sort of getting involved in politics. And of course, we should not forget that the IEC argued with MK and against the ANC in the registration case. In other words, the IEC registered MK as a political party ahead of these elections and then defended that registration. So, you know, there's a lot that goes on in different directions here. But do you think we're now going to have a situation where the IEC is not just under more pressure than ever before because of the sheer volume of work, because of the new changes to this election, the number of candidates, but also politically for various reasons, and I'm sure there'll be complaints from other parties too ahead, during and after the elections, but actually they're going to come under more pressure from political parties too?
Yeah, that's I think an important point, Stephen, and something that I didn't realize until I was having a conversation with one of the commissioners in a recent conversation, was that in the past couple of electoral cycles, the number of legal challenges to the elections has been growing in the post-election period. It used to be that the commission had earned a well-earned break after the election, and they could sit back and relax for at least a couple of weeks before the business of resolving the election and wrapping things up could continue. But nowadays, the legal challenges are ongoing and really can take quite some time to wrap up. So I certainly anticipate that there will be legal challenges because the number of legal challenges have been growing. And given the temperature of these elections and given everything that's gone into the pre-election period that we've seen, it seems almost inevitable that we will see the IEC in court either as a plaintiff or as a complainant in some way. Most likely it'll be a plaintiff, but we will certainly be back in court around these elections in some form, probably in several forms across the country.
Grant Masterson, thank you, elections specialist. Do appreciate the time and the view.